cartels. CFR 24 finds that the Sinaloa cartel, Mexico's oldest and most powerful cartel success, is linked to its global drug supply chain. Better surveillance can solve drug trafficking from running rampant. All 24 writes that to increase the number of inspections, we need more standards and technology. Anomaly detection algorithms use artificial intelligence to analyze X-ray images scanned at the border, which will act as a force multiplier that will speed vehicle processing. At most ports of entry, the X-rays happen as a part of secondary inspections. CBP is working on installing X-ray scanners before the primary inspection point, so all the cars and trucks heading into the U.S. can be X-rayed. But the tools aren't being used at the border yet. Affirmative is the last step. Vault 24 continues that CBP has the most up-to-date fentanyl detecting machines, but the agency has not been able to install them because Congress hasn't appropriated the funds to do so. Further, drug surveillance needs to be more comprehensive. CBP doesn't scan each of the thousands of cars and trucks that pass through ports of entry every day. Right now, CBP scans about 20% of commercial vehicles and less than 5% of personal vehicles. Additionally, thousands die from trafficked drugs. NCDAS 23 reports that over 96,700 people die from drug overdoses in 1 year. Our second contention is trade. Lackluster border infrastructure poses a consistent threat to U.S.-Mexico trade. Burger 23 finds that a series of bottlenecks at the U.S.-Mexico border, triggered by migration surgences, cause massive backups for inbound trade. However, the problem continues to proliferate because the uncertainty at the border decreases investments from the government on how to improve the cross-border movement. Empirically, Pascal 22 reveals that blockades have cost the Mexican economy $40 million in losses in 5 days. This is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of exports eliminated from the Mexican economy. Surveillance tech can streamline the process. According to Log 22, technology can help in achieving more reliable border wait times. Combining AI algorithms with satellite and aerial imagery can facilitate disruption by getting trucks to their destination more effectively. Additionally, Atlantic Council 23 finds that deploying high-tech screening technologies further away from ports of entry would facilitate a greater and faster flow of cargo and passenger information. This would prevent bottlenecks and queues. Furthermore, Lopez 24 says that the border security regulates cross-border movements, fostering secure trade channels, which boost investor confidence. These benefits are crucial. Review 22 furthers that improvements at the border generate economic benefits. This is because just a 10-minute reduction in wait times could lead to an additional $312 million worth of cargo entering the U.S. annually. Beyond added commerce, this 10-minute reduction would create 18,700 jobs in Mexico and boost growth in various economic sectors. This curtails poverty. As DOJ 18 finds out with Mexicans, there is a positive and statistically significant effect of economic growth on the reduction of poverty, both in the long run as in the short run. This impacts millions, as World Bank 24 finds that 46.8 million Mexicans are still living in poverty. That's real facts.
I'll send the cards, right? Listen, I don't get it. I just got it. Yeah. I'm ready. It shouldn't be bad.
the Shine Bomb does not appear confrontational, her problem-solving approach should establish a good basis for working through crime, migration, and trade. This is crucial. We're collaborating with Mexico on the border now and tackling problems that are really there. Miller wrote in 2022 that Mexico agreed to hunt smugglers, and furthermore, anything found this year, that Mexico is stopping 3 times as many migrants. Their willingness to interdict immigration, fentanyl, and firearms is because we've treated them as a sovereign equal. But after years of U.S. failures, Mexico is skeptical of one-sided border policies. Increasing surveillance could alone ruin our relationship. Christie explained in March, the U.S. cannot by itself dictate what happens at the border. Cooperation is critical. As Fletcher furthers, that Mexico would not let themselves be bullied by the United States over migration. U.S.-Mexico relations are vital for the safety and economies of North America. Being detailed in 2017, allowing relations to go off the rails will cost U.S. economic security interests and employment of 6 million Americans is tied to Mexico. American stability depends on Mexican stability. Contention 2 is farming. Currently, Lane 24 finds that grocery prices fell for the first time in 12 months. Undocumented immigrants are key to American agriculture. Morality 22. U.S. agriculture needs 2 million hired workers each year. Undocumented farm workers make up 50% of the workforce. Workers are granted visas, but only less than 4% of the total workers numbers needed. Border security directly trades off with workers. Field 12. As a 10% increase in enforcement spending causes agricultural exports to decline by 5%. Empirically, Davidoff 11 finds that H-2A delays were not conducive to laborers. As border enforcement intensified, entry of undocumented immigrants into the United States farm force was thwarted, which led to a 20% of agricultural products not harvested. Thus, Canales 22 finds that higher admission of immigrant workers are directly related with lower prices. This continued flow of immigrants is needed. Standing 21 finds an issue is holding on to workers. Immigrants don't plan to work in farm labor longer than necessary. Global food exports are reliant on U.S. agricultural prices. Range 23 finds due to favorable climate and access to human capital, the U.S. is a world leader in agriculture and the largest exporter of agriculture to developing nations. And developing nations are driving demand for U.S. products, and the U.S. remains important. More importantly, now is key, Oxfam 24. 281 million people are suffering hunger. The number of people on the brink of famine almost doubled since last year. A rise in food prices would be devastating, as Caldwell Owen concludes that in developing countries, increases in food prices would push 100 million into the ranks of the poor. Contention 3 is trade. U.S.-Mexico trade is at an all-time high at the border. In 2024, against the backdrop of soaring U.S.-Mexico trade along the border regions, Mexico is the U.S. top trading partner. Current X-ray tech is efficient, 20 times the lowering, Telfar 24. Solutions to address traffic in the U.S.-Mexico border includes 559 projects to reduce border crossing times by 60%. Aft wait times will significantly get worse, as Vasquez 24 finds that the DHS plan to implement X-ray tech would check 100% of vehicles, crossing times will be doubled. Scanning every vehicle is detrimental to trade. Flynn no date warns that scanning is detrimental to trade, delays or inspection queues. Equipment generates more alarms than human capacity can resolve. The need to divert containers to inspection facilities and gender congestion. Even if more than adequate investment is made, the disruption significantly degrades supply chains. Moreover, AI cannot solve. There's a shortage of people to manage systems. Graham 24. AI and technology alone is not a viable solution. Advanced technologies isn't enough. As a result, trade would shut down. Strickland 24. With 1 million people crossing the border every day, scanning every vehicle would shut down trade. But even if 100% aren't scanned, trade decreases by at least 1/3. Wang 20 from UChicago analyzes 50+ barriers around the world and finds that they can reduce trade between neighboring countries as much as 31%. A country that is concerned about border security increases inspections at legal ports of entry, which would increase shipping times and costs. The construction itself of tech would decrease trade. Ramirez 23, CBP inspections in construction is expected to shut down lanes. Reducing trade with Mexico would devastate our economy, as Rajiv 23 quantifies the restriction on trade could reduce the GDP by 12%, and historically, in economic declines at this time, Alexander Penn concludes that it leads to 100 million people below the poverty line. Because we're passing a unilateral policy, right?
Why is it unilateral?
Because it's just the United States passing.
Yeah, but the resolution doesn't say unilateral or bilateral.
Yeah, well, if the United States passes southern border surveillance, we can't just all of a sudden imply that it will also pass it in cooperation with Mexico.
Well, we can though, right? Because in the past, every single time we've increased border surveillance, it's always been on good terms with Mexico.
No, it hasn't. Sure, it's been on good terms, but it's never actually been together. Our argument is that Shine Bomb is a lot more confrontational about certain things in comparison to our predecessor, AMLO. So our argument is that as of right now, if you pass border security, it would be unilateral for the resolution because it doesn't say with Mexico. And just as the United States could increase southern border surveillance, like who's funding the southern border surveillance? Obviously the United States. There's no fiat in the resolution with Mexico. I have a question. Cool. On trade, how much wait times decrease?
By 10 minutes.
They were only decreased by 10 minutes if you were firm.
Well, our impact is linked to 10 minutes of that stuff.
So, but how much would surveillance decrease wait times? Is what I'm trying to ask.
By 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay, let's go to your C2, or C3 on trade. What was that thing you said, like, about doing without 100%?
Yeah, a Chicago study by Post analyzed 50 plus borders that implemented security across 50 countries, and they found that whenever they implemented it, even if scanning wasn't at a 100% rate, these barriers led to a 31% decrease in trade between neighboring countries, which means that even if you don't implement the 100% rate that we're arguing would be implemented, trade just decreases by implementing border security at a significant level.
So we haven't implemented 100%, and you're saying in case that trade is going up right now.
What?
Okay, in case you say
Yeah.
that trade is going up right now.
Yeah.
But then you tell me that even if we don't scan 100%, it will still affect other countries. We don't even scan 100% right now.
Yeah, the argument is that as long as you substantially increase surveillance, it will lead to a much greater barrier, which would trigger the link. Like right now we scan like 15%, right? And our argument is that if you get even close to the majority or even close to just implementing substantial surveillance, it will lead to a 31% decrease in trade.
Okay.
Okay, on drugs, do cartels just give up once you put surveillance there?
No.
So then, how do you find any solvents?
Well, because you're taking down cartels in Mexico, right? Remember when you increase the Mexican economy, when you're benefiting it, that means
Wait.
Mexico is not.
That's the drugs argument? You increase
Yeah.
the economy?
Oh, wait, no. This is like a win for my CC.
But what's the drug? I'm saying that, okay, so you have to win C2 to win the cartel argument?
Sure.
Okay, you got a question.
On finally, you say that we need a continued flow of workers, but why?
Well, one, our minority evidence indicates we need 2 million every year, and the biggest reason for that is because a lot of them, once they get into the farming industry, either want to leave because it's like the first stepping stone into the United States, so they want to go to better jobs.
When you say some trend.
Oh, yeah, I can, oh. relations. Remember, our C2 trade helps the Mexican economy by increasing trade. Remember, this is a two-way street, which, if anything, would improve bilateral relations. Further, the U.S. and Mexico collaborate on border security. AP23 sees that Mexico's president said that he is willing to help out with the surge of migrants that led to a closure of the border crossings with the United States. The U.S. and Mexico have recently collaborated on border security. There's no reason that we would have to stop if we had to increase surveillance. Surveillance does not deteriorate U.S.-Mexico relations. They never mention why affirmative would not be bilateral, especially when historically surveillance efforts are cooperative. Prefer this because we give you precedent. And then second is agriculture. First, the agriculture sector exploits undocumented workers. Sinedo 20 says that immigrant workers have few protections. They were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, and workers are regularly subjected to abuses ranging from high occurrence of sexual assault and harassment, wage theft and safety issues, including increased fatalities on the job and exposure to hazardous chemicals. If you don't buy this, look at the non-unique. The number of migrant workers is going to significantly decrease anyway. Wolf 24 said that Trump promised mass deportation in 2016. Trump is bringing the pledge back. Trump told Time he would target about between 15 million and 20 million people who he said are undocumented in the U.S. And then D-Link, because migrant workers no longer make up a majority of agricultural workers. Refer our evidence because it co-states. USDA 24 states that 85% of higher crop farm workers are not migrant workers. This share is up from 41%, reflecting a change in the crop workforce. Among the small share of migrant workers is shuttlers who cross a border to get their work, and then follow crop workers who are decreasing. And then Jordan 19 writes that while President Trump has focused on blocking unauthorized crossings on the southern border, there has been nearly half of these people who have entered lawfully and are just unlawful because they have now overstayed their visa. That's why their impact actually doesn't happen, because they're impacting to those who are coming in unlawfully. We're talking about those unlawful people who are coming in lawfully and originally. On trade, cross out our C2 on trade because you should be preferring our Atlantic Council 23 evidence, because their evidence on Vasquez 24 is completely an opinion piece. It tells you in itself that the alternative to x-rays would wait for DHS staff to conduct a meticulous search of our vehicle and personal belongings. This helps our case because it proves that x-rays are the fastest screening tech available right now. They even tell you themselves that x-rays are the fastest and more efficient than they could ever be, so they don't tell you why a substantial increase would make these processes slower. And then always refer us on this because our evidence is an organization that's literally meant for national security. And then not only that, their evidence is still taking into account that cars will go one by one, whereas ours specifically states that cars will be scanned while they're in line, speeding up the processes on net. Remember that when we can get the passenger information while they're in line, that goes to the ports of entry, and that means that there's more reliable wait times, and that means that investors will be more confident to be investing here. And then trade is already on the high with Mexico, or that's what they say. This doesn't matter. We shouldn't just stop because we have better trade than before. In any case, we are telling you that it will boost investor confidence. This doesn't respond to our case about the efficiency or speed of trade. Even if it's high, that doesn't necessarily mean it's fast, that it's at a fast enough pace. Even if you do think it's enough to take down our case, you should have been already seeing the impacts of more jobs in Mexico triggered, but we haven't because clearly it's not fast enough trade.
Is everything on top?
Oh, wait, can you send the trade card? Can you send the one card on trade that you read about? They get scanned in the line.
That's in our case, sorry.
Which one? Let me see.
Atlantic Council 23.
Oh wait, did you send me? Can you just send that one card? If you can one just to the card, yeah.
Okay, I'll just send it.
to be signed.
Part-time. We have some more. Oh. Alright, 1 minute.
What's your third case?
Wait, you said starts on their case?
Our case.
Oh, okay.
On relations, every single one piece of their evidence are talking about the past presidents. We would argue that Steinbach specifically doesn't like border surveillance because she stands on business, which is why she wants sovereignty on the border, and we would argue that our evidence points very specifically that she herself says that she doesn't want the U.S. to be interfering here. On farming, first they say that there's few protections for farmers. Reforms are happening because people are becoming more progressive, which means that they're being more like included in labor laws. Second, we would argue that the situation is a lot worse at home, which is why they're choosing to stay here. Second, they argue that Trump is already going to do mass deportations. This is facilitated by surveillance. B, our argument doesn't just talk about surveillance deportation, it talks about people coming in as seasonal workers as well. Third, they argue that migrants aren't the majority, but our evidence is a lot better. It says that 75% of them are undocumented immigrants. Their evidence just talks about the general general agricultural industry, not just in migrants. Then they said they've overstayed their visas, but only 4% have overstayed their visas. On trade, first, they cross up C2, I'll get to it there. Second, they say that the Atlantic Council evidence is better. Our evidence isn't an opinion-based evidence, but moreover, you can, even if you don't buy that, you can buy range funding, which says that it's also decreases trade by 31%. Second, we would argue that X-rays are already in place right now, which is why their Atlantic Council evidence is really bad, and we would argue that negating means that we're just improving these X-ray systems. Then they say that we're scanning one by one. No, that's not what their evidence says. It says that we're scanning passenger information, which is not scanning these trucks. Then, they argue that the alternative is humans, but we would argue that that's not true because X-rays are in place right now. What they're doing is they're adding unnecessary bureaucratic steps that are not improving existing technology. Then, they argue that we should see trade increase in the status quo. Thank God we see that trade is already at all-time highs at $862 billion right now. Go to their case. On cartels, they have oversimplified this issue into a one-stop shop solution. They argue that cartels are worse, but Francis 24 indicates that collaboration is happening between U.S. and Mexico in the status quo, which is why Man 24 indicates that death rate decreased by the end of this year by 20,000 people. Moreover, they're solving a problem that doesn't exist, and they reverse the progress. They deport more people, which is why AS24 indicates that they're having destroyed or die mindset when you go back to their home country because they don't have employment opportunities, which is why they end up joining cartels instead. Corral 23 indicates that cartel recruitment is key to curb their influence, which is why we pre-write their case because the cartels don't have enough people to people to smuggle the drugs anyway. Second, it makes cartels harder to track because sample 24 indicates that tunneling systems and submarine systems always circumvent U.S. technology, which is why we have way in the long term because this is the root cause of cartel smuggling. If we can't find the cartels in the first place, we can't detect their drugs. Then, turn again, they become more violent. HRMI 19 explains that we increase tensions, which is why increasing tensions with cartels means that they actually use their arms. In the status quo, they're not actually using their arms, which is why when you actually affirm, they get triggered and they actually end up becoming a lot more violent than in the status quo. Go to trade. They have conceded in cross that they have to win their C1 in order to win trade, which is why you can cross-apply all of the response on C1. Moreover, they have conceded the fact that in the status quo, trade is at an all-time high of $864 billion right now, and Killcar24 explains that there's 559 projects that decrease cross times by 60%. The worst is because Utah24 explains that because of the hedge race between U.S. and China, the United States and Mexico are always focusing on more trade, which is why they have developed other projects like infrastructure projects to increase trade that's not part of surveillance, which is why we have seen more roads being built, more trade lanes being built, and this is not affirmative. Second, we have also seen that the resolution said that we're increasing surveillance on the border. Our definition indicates that when we increase surveillance on the border, every single empirical example of this happening in every single country where we have increased surveillance Chicago, and it's a meta-analysis that analyzes every time we increase surveillance. Moreover, Graham 24 indicates that there's a manpower shortage of 5,000 people that can't be covered by an increase in technology or an increase in AI, and this is a meta-analysis that says that even if we were to improve the existing systems, and even if we were to improve surveillance systems, it would not be able to be covered by even the best the best systems because we have a lack of manpower. Okay. Alright.
Time to can I just ask this question?
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me why this trade slow down? Like, I know you say like you have like a 31% that goes down, but like why?
Two reasons. The first reason is because the Protecting Our Borders Act says that we have to scan 100% of vehicles when we implement surveillance systems. The second reason is because when we put more surveillance on the border, it means that we're securing it, which means that we're basically turning the border into a new TSA system, and we're scanning all the vehicles that are going through. Our evidence indicates that when we scan more vehicles, no matter the quality of the scanning, the quantity is always going to overwhelm the quality. Can I have a question? Okay. Let's look at your argument about cartels, right? Okay. Are cartels getting better or worse in status quo?
When you say control?
Yeah.
Well, we would argue that they're getting worse. But even if you say they're getting better, then right now is the one time that we should be increasing surveillance so that we can actually solidify this.
Wait, why right now?
Because if you're saying that collaboration is up, then right now would be the one time that you actually want to be increasing surveillance so that you can actually solidify the fact that we're taking down the cartels.
Okay. Okay, sure. You have a question.
Okay. So, actually, don't have a question.
I'll take one. Okay. On cartels, you say that we're scanning 20% of vehicles right now. What's the alternative? How many vehicles are we scanning?
Wait, really?
On cartels, the last evidence says that we're scanning 20% of vehicles right now. To solve the cartel crisis, how many vehicles are you scanning?
It would have to go up at least like a substantial amount. That's because like when we have a substantial increase in scannings, that's at least perceptual to cartels. It makes it harder for them, one, because now they have to circumvent, and then two, that's harder for them because they have to be like using more resources to do so.
Okay, so if we win, so you agree that we're going to be scanning a substantially more amount of vehicles, right?
Yes. Okay. So like again, as my partner said, like would you say that 100% is needed for like 10 minutes of like reduced wait times?
No, our argument is that scanning 100% of vehicles is a really bad thing. The problem is that the law says that when we increase surveillance, we need to scan 100% of vehicles.
But we've increased surveillance in the past few years. Why haven't we been scanning 100% in the past few years?
The problem is that it's never been a substantial increase, and it hasn't been on these trade ports, which is why our evidence indicates that with new technology, quote unquote, the government has the perception that they can increase scans to 100%, and empirically, we have already increased trade scans from 15% to 40%.
Okay. Can you send me that part through your press?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Okay, I'll look at it. Okay. So then you also say this thing that passenger information does not speed up the processes. Why?
Well, your argument is that we're going to do AI scanning on the trucks, but your card is talking about how we're collecting information, like we're using ChatGPT to make them fill out a form. That's not like scanning the trucks.
Okay.
Okay, so it's gonna be our case, then Sean, the most important contention of this round is to receive to one trade. We tell you that right now, a certain microception border are causing massive backups for inbound trade. That's affirming health way for adding new trade like surveillance tech that makes it easy and efficient for a faster flow of cargo. That's really good because trade efficiency helps the U.S. economy and Mexico economy, creating 18,700 jobs that could eventually help bring 46.8 million Mexicans out of poverty. They tell you, brief their first and last responses about or actually just on their last turn about cartels becoming more violent, and just all their cartel responses in general. Remember that when you're increasing the Mexican economy, benefiting it, that means you're investing directly into their national security, meaning that Mexico can just take down these cartels by themselves. Then they tell you that the AF reports and the try or die, so that's actually coming to the U.S. is better than any other alternative. Remember, our C2 makes living conditions in Mexico better, meaning they don't have to go, meaning you're improving living conditions, meaning they don't have to leave. It's not try or die. But then, they also tell you that cartels will just be harder to find. Remember that you can solve with fiber optics, there's technology for that, and also if you're taking cartels down as a whole in Mexico, they won't be able to expand. Next, on C2 on trade, they tell you that you need to win C1 to win C2, we just won C1. Okay, then they tell you that infrastructure is increasing trade, you don't need to affirm. But even if you're increasing trade, that doesn't matter because it's about the speed and efficiency, that's what our whole case relies on. But then, they tell you that they're decreasing 31% in other countries. But then remember that their evidence isn't specific to our evidence about standing in line. Even if it is about passenger information, standing in line is still a process of getting it's still part of the process of getting scanned, right? That on that decreases wait time. But then they also tell you that there's a lack of manpower, but that's not true because it's still the same amount of fish, you're just going faster. But then on their diplomacy, they tell you that Scheinbaum is really different or whatever, right? Scheinbaum's not that different. She's being trained to become the next AMLO, meaning their mindsets and ideologies about these things are going to be the same. But then, on the alternative resource, remember, we always make Mexican living conditions better. People are leaving because of poor economic conditions. We solve for that when you improve the economy in Mexico. But then, C3 on trade, they tell you that it's not an opinion piece. Again, they bring up this 31% card. Their card isn't specific to the evidence that we tell you about. Our Atlantic Council 23 evidence was just talking about while you're standing in line, so on that wait time go down. But then, they also tell you that passenger information is different. Again, trucks are still getting processed. It's still part of the whole process of getting scanned, so on that, you're still decreasing wait times. But then, remember that we're weighing on time frame. Remember that we tell you that we increase jobs in Mexico, and we're helping generations of poverty because it becomes a cascading effect. We prefer the long-term view. When you solve for poverty, you solve for that. That's 46.8 million Mexicans. But then, their impacts are minimal at best. You're voting for the alpha on this because this is a clean win. We're winning our case, we're winning their case, and we're winning the weighing debate. They can't even tell you the same their long-term impact.
Can we take bus drive? Did you extend exploits workers on farm?
Or just anything.
You extend exploits workers? Okay, cool.
Is that all there is in one card?
What improvement? Like that.
When improvement.
Improving the Mexican economy.
Oh, okay, sure. I'm at 40, 240 getting.
case, weighing their case. Or our case, responding to their weighing, our weighing them. The most important argument in this round is second one farming. Prices are decreasing right now because of undocumented workers who make up 45% of the workforce and 2 million new workers are needed each year. Here they reach 10% increase in enforcement, such as 5% decrease in exports, and 20% of farm things have gone unharvested. This cuts exports, and the United States is the number one exporter to the developing countries and increases prices because of more shipping costs and exports costs, which cause 100 million people to go into poverty globally. They've extended that we exploit workers. They've conceded both responses that while reform is happening, that there be more included into labor policy. They've also conceded that the situation in Mexico is worse, and they have chosen to be in this job because it's the American dream. Okay, the next response is weighing. I'll get to that now. They say better economy, which means they've conceded that their impact is only 18,000 jobs. They cannot solve the whole issue. It's not that much of an increase in the economy, which means you cannot buy this prereq. Then there's also other incentives to leave Mexico. Things like the American dream that always will believe America's better, so they're still going to leave. They also say that their impact is more long term. No, ours is if anything more long term. And I was in school because it affects the entire world. Our argument is just a 10% decrease, or a 10% decrease in wage tax and 18,000 jobs. They say our argument is small. Our argument is only a small percent of the industry, but no, it's the whole industry of agriculture. On our way. First, outlook on time frame. They've conceded 281 million people around the nation or around the world are starving and on the brink. So any cuts in exports to developing countries would directly lead 81 million people into poverty. Also, our argument is much more global than theirs. Way on scope, it expands 100 million people, which their impact is only 18,000 jobs, and their impact is domestically. Per scope, is the most objective way of analysis. Numbers a lot more better than any other mechanism because other ones like probability and macro are subjective per judge. Okay, on their case. On cartels, extend the deportation term. They can see that the surveillance with increasing amount of people who turn around the border, which means that because they're upset, they turn to cartels. One response, and this is key because cartel recruitment is the biggest source of power and the biggest source of drugs. One response that Mexico economy solves, but they've also conceded there's only 18,000 jobs. They cannot solve the whole issue on net. They're preferring our term over their term because our term directly links to a bigger issue of cartels, which would directly lead to more people dying because they have more people to recruit drugs across the border versus their term only affects 18,000 people decreasing. On trade, their one front line was that they're scanning inline, which is the only warrant they have given you. But scanning inline is not what their evidence says. Their evidence talks about giving forms inline, which is not scanning. They say this would also decrease wait times. One, they cannot quantify by how much. But two, our argument would be that the amount of cars you actually have to scan would increase the backlog of trades. Why there's no reason why scanning inline or this passenger information form that takes like ChatGPT to fill out in like 4 seconds would cause any backlog. And they've also conceded manpower shortage because they say it doesn't matter. For our argument, the grim and plan evidence has told you because even if adequate investments in technology are made, trade will not increase in wait times because there's not enough manpower to go and actually use the technology, which is a prior question technology. They've conceded the terminal defense on trade. They've conceded prior cartels. The way is being argued. Yeah.
Alright, so what, can you re-explain why are these markets going why are migrants going to
Cartels?
Yeah.
So the argument that we're making is that when they're deported by surveillance, they go back to their home country. And because Alright, anyways, they go back to their home country, and because of that, they don't have employment opportunities in their home country. What ends up happening is that
arguing for literally employment opportunities.
Alright, but 19,000 jobs, we would argue that there's so many more people that are being turned around back into Mexico, but moreover, we would argue that even if this was the case, there's so many untapped jobs, it doesn't matter because they don't have access to these employment opportunities. When they go back into Mexico, they don't have employment opportunities, which means that their only method for survival is by joining the cartel, and empirically that's true. In 2016, when we increased surveillance at the border, we saw that more people went back into Mexico, and we saw that the cartel presence in Mexico actually increased.
Yeah, but we also take down cartels, which was my response when we were investing in Mexico. Not just because we tell you that Mexico can take down these cartels themselves.
Alright, on trade, why is filling out a form, why will that decrease wait times? Or why would that decrease wait times?
Because that's like one of the biggest parts of the process. Like, it needs to be processed so that they can actually enter the country.
Wait, so they're in line, right?
Yeah.
So they're filling out the form. And then they get to the scan. The scan takes a while to detect
Also, we literally read
But how does
like
What does the form have any
have,
part of the delay? If they're already in line, they're just filling the
Okay.
form out.
when they're in line and they're being like processed at least, then you have reliable wait times. Like
Wait.
they know the information.
You're
on
telling me
the-
that,
it's
wait,
like-
you're telling me we need technology for me to be able to fill out a form when I'm waiting in line?
It's for the tech. Wait, what?
Like, why do we need to affirm for me to all of a sudden be able to fill this form out and decrease?
Like
it?
it's
Why
like
can't I just fill
asking
the form
like,
out now?
oh, are you like, no, you're like, yeah.
Wait,
I don't know if I need ChatGPT tell me click buttons like.
wait, I'm just asking you, why do you need the app to then fill the form out to then decrease wait times? Because that's the warrant you guys have collapsed on as to why none of our responses are responsive. I'm saying, why did the app result in me now filling out the form?
Because that's what they would be using the form.
Wait, so you're telling me the form, like, I can't just fill out the form without, like, surveillance increases? Like, the camera's watching me now, I gotta fill the form out. Wait, I'm asking, like, what's the form? I don't get the form argument.
It's like, what? I don't understand. It's like you need to have like proper identification. That's what the AI is for, and is be processing it. And there's like also databases to like ensure that you're a real person as well. I don't think those are real like security issues.
What does your evidence say that the implementation of AI in trade is?
The Atlanta Council.
Yes.
No, what does it say the implementation is? It's your evidence, like, I don't know,
It's going to be helping to process information.
no. It says that AI helps you fill out forms. That's like, what's the whole thing?
So the arguments are At the end of the day, judges, there's no place to vote for the act because the strength of our trade conclusion. Let's reiterate our case. Right now, a surge of migrants to the border is causing massive backup for inbound trade. Affirming helps by adding new surveillance tech that makes it easy and efficient for faster flow of cargo. This is good because trade efficiency helps the U.S. economy and Mexico economy, creating 18,700 jobs that could eventually help bring out 46.8 million Mexicans out of poverty. On trade, they have a few responses here. First, they tell you that getting processed isn't like a big part of like why we need scanners. First of all, we tell you that getting processed for verification and ID is everything a part of like being scanned. They'll try to screen it so that we actually don't have like the real evidence to like tell you this. But we're telling you that you need passenger information to identify these people, and that's important because it needs to get to ports of entry faster so that they can actually process these people at a faster rate. They're talking about the amount of people that are going through. We're talking about how fast they go through. And then they say like again they're not scanning in line. Again, they're telling you they're talking about background checks. And then they said that like cartels depend on like employment. Again, we're telling you that when we employ more people in Mexico, that means that we're taking away from cartels. This is just a stepping stone to take down cartels on a whole. And then on their case, farming, remember, it stems that we tell you that we're impacted to the economy, which means that Mexico gets better. They say that we can see that Mexico gets worse. No, we don't, because we're creating again 18,700 jobs. And then don't remember that we're also increasing trade. That means that we're actually making it better. And then remember that we're also extending our exploitation thing that says that in the U.S. it's actually much worse because they get exploited constantly and they don't actually have a good response to this, except for to say that it's worse in Mexico, a good response to that. And then even if labor laws are getting passed, it takes way way too long to actually implement them and actually to get all these people onto these labor laws. And then on weighing, we would tell you again prefer our time frame weighing because it shows that we actually are impacting to the long term. They never tell you anything about the long term at all. They're not responsive. We tell you that again, 18,700 jobs sets up a future economy.
We'll take 20 seconds for all.
Three voters on our case on the term and then on trade. The first word on your ballot is balance. Fortunately, we have balance in agriculture right now, which is why 45% of agricultural workers are undocumented, and there's 2 million workers that are needed every single year. Historically, every 10% increase in enforcement and surveillance on the border leads to a 5% decrease in exports in agriculture, which is why food prices are going to skyrocket and 100 million people are going to be pushed into poverty globally. This outweighs their case on scope. I'll get to this later. First on their response, they say that the economy means that Mexico's going to perform better. This doesn't interact with our link because our link is about the U.S. agricultural industry. It doesn't have anything to do with the Mexican economy. They don't work this out onto our case. Moreover, they say that people have few protections in the agricultural industry. We would argue that they can see that reforms are happening right now because we are becoming more progressive, which is why we don't see that there's so many bad conditions in the future or right now. Okay. Even on their economy gets better turn, we would say that we outweigh on scope because insofar as we're accessing our link as soon as you affirm, and people are not coming to the United States, 100 million people are going to be pushed into poverty globally. This outweighs their case on scope because their argument is just about U.S. and Mexico, whereas we're affecting every single person around the world. Their trade between U.S. and Mexico is also things that include my urban outfitters. Well, that's not as important as things like agriculture, which directly impacts people's lives and their hunger. Also, on their case, their impact is only 18,000 jobs, whereas our impact is 100 million people into poverty, which is why you should always be preferring us there. They have never quantified their impacts there. Even on their case, they have conceded a few things. The first thing they concede is that actually, let's start on trade. On trade, they have conceded terminal defense. Grant 24 indicates that there's a manpower shortage of 5,000 people, which means that they cannot physically win their arguments if they're not winning this argument, because if there's a manpower shortage, they don't have people to use the surveillance technology that even if it is implemented, which is why trade systems don't become faster. They cannot win trade if they're not winning that we have enough manpower. We're winning that cleanly. They have cold conceded this argument. Even more, they have also conceded our turn on a cartel that says that deportation is going to fuel cartels. AS24 indicates that people are having to destroy their time once when they go back to Mexico and join cartels, which is why on balance there's going to be higher cartel presence. This also outweighs their case because it means that there's not going to be collaboration on trade if there's more cartel